From business to entertainment, I sit down with folks who have reached their own level of success to discuss their accomplishments, the lessons they've learned, and the challenges they faced along the way. You're listening to The Jordan James Show. The importance of reading is completely undeniable. It expands the mind, allows for creative thinking, and helps to improve concentration. It's especially important for children who are just beginning to develop literacy skills to spark imagination and stimulate curiosity. I'm Jordan James, and on this episode, we talk to the award-winning children's author Jennifer McGrath and find out why it's important for Canadian children to see themselves reflected in the stories they read. We'll also explore her journey of becoming the established writer that she is today. Jennifer McGrath, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you're an award-winning children's author from Moncton, New Brunswick. How far away is that from us right now?
Many hours.
Yeah, almost opposite sides of Canada, the great Canada.
Yeah, well, I'm on the East Coast, Moncton. I'm just outside of Moncton, New Brunswick in Hillsborough. It's a small town, and actually I come full circle. I actually grew up here, but have lived in other places in a way, and I just moved back about 2 years ago now. So it's a place where a lot of my stories originate from. So it is good to be back.
Absolutely. So take us back, way back to the beginning. Tell us a little bit about you. Well, we know where you're from, but take us back to your childhood.
That really started, I grew up in a household of books. I grew up in a household of readers. My parents read to me for as long as I can remember. And I can remember some of my earliest memories were sitting on the couch with my mom, and she was reading me Robin Hood, like not the picture book version, but the actual novel version, and my dad reading me Lord of the Rings when I was in grade 1, and I still had nightmares about the Black Riders. Oh, no doubt. Books and stories in general were just always a part of my landscape. And I think I always knew I would be a storyteller. I think just because I couldn't imagine being outside of stories. I couldn't imagine stories not being part of my landscape. So I was a little bit of a quiet kid growing up, and I found books were my sanctuary. And I think I just never really wanted to leave them. Absolutely. So what is it about storytelling that you find so compelling? I think I like to be entertained, honestly. Part of it is I like to be entertained. The flip side of that is I like to see other people being entertained. I like to see them have that moment of delight or surprise or that unexpected laugh or joke. And I wanted to be able to share the experience that I felt growing up when books become your best friend, or they become that reality that you can escape into if you want to. And just, I love sharing that experience. There's a real intimacy, I think, with stories and books, and being able to have a part in that relationship and being able to share that with somebody else in a larger scale is really, really something. It's a privilege. And as a small town girl from New Brunswick, where do your stories come from? Where do you get all these amazing ideas? I think a lot of my stories do originate from a sense of place, from the landscape. When I wasn't reading growing up, I was outdoors, and I was in the woods, or I was roaming the fields or walking the beach. And like all kids, I think at a certain age, you want to have adventure. So if I wasn't looking for it in the outdoor world, then I was writing it or reading about it. So my books kind of reflect that. So I find the stories come from the land. A lot of them come from nature, and a lot of them come from the landscape here in particular. Out of your stories arriving out of personal connection and connection to community, talk to me a little bit about the importance of children's literature in general. Yeah, well, first of all, it's one of those very authentic primary experiences that you have. I think it's a way of learning to connect with your world. It's a way of learning to make sense of it. Children's literature provides a way for how to cope with the world that we find ourselves in and how to just make sense of it. A good children's book brings a level of authenticity to an experience that, it's as useful for an adult coming back to those stories as it is for a child entering those stories. It's a wonderful genre, and I think it speaks to all ages.
Right. And tell me a little bit about the stigma that has traditionally been attached to children's literature and how we've seen that kind of shape in the new world.
I think children's literature as a genre has evolved to a very, very, very well recognized body of art in and of itself now. There was a time probably that it was seen a little bit lesser than. It was seen as a way of educating kids or delivering a moral, and it's certainly moved beyond that now. Children's books, works of art in and of themselves, in the same way that a piece of poetry is, or the same way that an art piece is, or a piece of music is. In that sense, it delivers the same level of appreciation and credibility as any of the arts. Really, if you look at it in that sense. Canadian children's literature in particular has always been of exceptional quality from decades and decades ago. Before children's literature became such a huge thing, such a huge industry that it is now, Canadian children's literature was always leading the pack. They were always, they were the bar. They were the bar that certainly I always aspired to as a writer. Some of the Canadian publishers have consistently delivered fantastic works of art in the form of children's literature.
What would you say has been the driving force or the main aspect of kind of breaking the stigma and bringing children's literature to the forefront that it is at now?
Quite a few decades ago, there was different books that kind of came on the scene. In Canada, I can point to the Robert Munsch phenomena. So if you want to look at like sort of mainstream commercial, there were some books that took it to that commercial level that made sort of people sort of sit up and take notice from that regard. But just the quality of the books in general that are being produced now, it is widely recognized that it is its own genre, it's its own art form. It really kind of, especially the picture book genre, it really kind of is this incredible fusion of art and poetry, because your word choice has to be so distilled, so well chosen and crafted and lyrical. It's all of these elements fused together. So it's quite a thing. It's a wonderful art form. But I mean, I think we're moving beyond the mentality where everybody goes, I could have written that. It's only, 900 words, or it's only 700 words. I could write that in my sleep.
Absolutely. And it's not just that many words, it's the right words, right? Definitely. So it's funny that you mentioned Robert Munsch, actually, because that brings me to our next point. How I grew up reading stories by authors like Robert Munsch, L.M. Montgomery, Melanie Watt, among many other great Canadian authors. Many of them are women. Philby Gilman, Kathy Stinson, Paulette Bourgeois from the Franklin series, my favorite.
Everybody loves Franklin.
Everyone loves Franklin. So talk to me a little bit about the significance of I Read Canadian Day on February 19th.
This was just a fantastic movement. It was a grassroots movement. It was the brainchild of Eric Walters, who is one of these phenomenally prolific Canadian authors. And it's a way of growing awareness and bringing attention to this incredible canon of work, of stories, of books that we have here in Canada. And I think the industry is, the children's book industry is a very large industry. It's very saturated. Some of those voices are maybe drowned out by just the sheer volume of content, as it were, that is out there in the market. So this is a way, it was a grassroots movement sort of led by Canadian authors and illustrators to spread the word about all of the books that are here, about the incredible diversity of stories and voices that we have here, and just to kind of amplify those voices and stories. so that more people become aware, because it really is, it's a treasure trove that we have here.
Absolutely. And that only was launched
last year.
This is the
second year.
This is the second year. Wow, amazing. So have you seen any difference?
Well, anecdotally, I've heard that it made a huge difference. I've heard reports from bookstores that they were very, very busy, people coming in and asking about I Read Canadian Day. There was quite a lot of buzz on social media. It was picked up on by the media. And a lot of people were talking about it in conversation and on the different social platforms. And, people like book lovers, especially, they love talking about their favorite books. So if you invite them to share, gee, what's your favorite book? Everybody they're very happy to say, look what I have. Check out this story. This is a wonderful story. And we just wanted to bring that focus and redirect that focus to Canadian authors and illustrators, because it is hard sometimes to get to be heard above the noise.
Now, just going back a little bit to your stories personally, having them arise out of connection to community, talk to me a little bit about the importance of seeing ourselves and our culture as Canadians reflected in those stories.
Incredibly important. And again, this comes back to the conversations that we're having about diversity as well. So it's very important, again, to show our communities, our stories, our perspectives, because maybe a book was written by a Canadian who's living overseas, or maybe a story is written by a new Canadian, and they're bringing their perspective and their stories and experiences. But we need to see ourselves in these stories, and kids in particular really need to see themselves in these stories. It's how they place themselves in the world, I think. It's how if you're trying to make sense of the world, and stories and books are a pathway to this, well, then you need to find stories that reflect you and reflect your experiences and who you are and what your situation is. So again, this comes back to I Read Canadian Day. The more we can amplify that, and the more we can bring attention to all these different stories, and because there is a real richness and a real diversity there. So we just want to help people find them. I think that comes back to what I Read Canadian is all about. It's helping people find the stories that are going to resonate with them. That's going to become that book, that special book. And
in the wake of modern times and everything changing and us going virtual and children reading books online more and more, where do you see the future of books going at this point?
That's a big question. I think they're always...
It is.
Well, I think books have had a pretty good run. So I think they will continue to have a pretty good run. I think, if it could be that they are enjoyed in electric format some more, but I kind of feel like there's probably always going to be a place for hardcover and print books as well, particularly in children's literature, because I think where kids' books, part of children's literature, is about that shared experience of reading aloud, especially for the young ones. And there's something about the act of reading a picture book, of having a child on a lap of a parent, or curled up next to an older brother or sister, or a grandparent or a friend or a cousin, and having a story read aloud. There's something about that shared experience that is very, very special. People never outgrow it. I think if you talk to a lot of adults, they will tell you that they still enjoy being read to. And it comes back to any conversation that you have. If you meet somebody and you come up to them and you say, I got to tell you a story. Let me tell you a story. That cue just makes everybody sit up and go, oh, what next? What happens next? Tell me. And and it's a very fundamental part of the human experience, is hearing other stories and sharing stories. And it starts on the lap. It starts these shared read aloud stories. So it's always going to be part of the human condition, I think. I think it's in our DNA.
Oh, definitely. Because even just thinking about that, if you're looking at something electronically, you're doing that by yourself, often, yeah. Right? I feel like when in the midst of an actual book, you're in the company of other people, and that's when you're sharing that experience with somebody else, just like what you just said now.
And now that said, technology has provided, fabulous pathways for, expanded accessibility and all that kind of thing. And I certainly hear, lots and lots from parents and educators on the benefits of having an audiobook, for example, for certain readers and certain learners, or perhaps struggling readers who are reading and listening at the same time. So, and the same translates, the same goes for various digital and e-versions. They may work better in some circumstances and situations for some readers. So it's wonderful having the variety of platforms, because really any way that can help someone access a story is good. So I think, we will continue to have stories in print, and we will continue to have these other versions as well. And it's just different layers.
Yeah, absolutely. And just kind of going back a little bit, you mentioned the relationship between authors and illustrators. I kind of want to talk about that marriage a little bit and how that kind of comes together.
That's a really fun question. In the publishing world, the author and the illustrator have very little contact. It's kind of like, say you're buying a house with a real estate agent and the buyer never talks to the seller directly. The real estate agent keeps everybody on, different sides of the room and is the intermediary. That's how the writing and illustration process works too in the publishing world. So the editor is the go-between. And there's a very important reason for this. Essentially, they don't want the writer getting in the way of the artist's process. I think would be the honest, short way to do that, to say that. So especially for a new writer, this can be a little bit nerve-wracking, because we can't help it, especially if we're visual people. As you're writing a story, you can't help but have a visual concept in the back of your head.
Of course.
So what you have to understand is that a trained artist, an artist who, this is their genre, this is their medium, will have an artistic vision for that story that maybe me as a writer can never have come up with, right? Mm-hmm. So you really don't want to get into each other's creative space too much. You don't want to impede that creative process. So I've been very fortunate in that I also work in communications, and I've worked with different marketing agencies, and I work professionally with designers. So I have had lots of firsthand experience. I know how designers work. Mm-hmm. I know how writers can inadvertently get in their way. So it's a lot about understanding, and respecting the other artist's expertise and creative process.
Right.
When I hear new writers say, "Oh, but I know what the illustration should look like, and I know what I want my book to look like," I tell them now, I say, "Whoa."
Time out.
What I say is, think of it as if you were a stage play writer or a script writer.
Right.
And someone else has taken your words, and someone else is going to cast that play. They're going to costume that play. They're going to set design that play, and they're going to stage direct it. And they may do all those things in ways that you could never have conceived of. Mm-hmm. And the result may be absolutely phenomenal. So you have to trust the creative process, and you have to respect the other artist. So depending on which publishing house you work with, different publishing houses and different editors work in different ways. They may invite lots of author feedback in the illustrative process. They may invite none.
Okay.
So hopefully you find a happy medium.
Right.
I've been very fortunate in my experiences, and I try not to get in the way, sometimes with less success than others, but I've had wonderful, experiences with illustrators and publishing houses alike. So
right. And that's where my question comes from is you must have an idea of the story visually while you're putting it together. Have you ever had that where you've looked at what the illustrator came up with and was like, no, this is not what I envisioned. This doesn't make sense.
Well, I think my reaction would be like, wow, I would never have imagined it like this, but this is awesome. So I think that's
Awesome.
kind of the attitude you have to take.
Well, that's a good answer. Thank you for that. So let's move in a little bit more to your career, because you've been all over the place, as we were discussing before the interview started. You got your bachelor's of English literature in Nova Scotia before earning your master's in English literature with a directed study in children's literature from the University of Victoria in BC. So talk to me about your career a little bit. How did you get started, and any challenges that you faced along the way there?
Academically speaking, I remember telling my undergrad thesis advisor that I wanted to do my honors thesis in Crossworld's children's fantasy. And he looked at me like I had two heads. Because it was just before children's literature was really kind of breaking on the scene as its own entity, I guess.
Right.
As its own critical entity. I mean, now you go to any university literature program, there's going to be a children's lit course, and probably several. It was not the case when I was going through.
Oh, wow.
But I knew even then that children's literature was something that I wanted to delve deeper into. Actually, at that point, if you had asked me, I would have said that I wanted to be a university professor. So I really had an academic path in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, I decided that I'd really rather be the one making the stories than discussing them, I guess.
Right.
or dissecting them, maybe.
Okay, yeah.
Delving into the critical aspect. Although I love that too. I still have that academic slant.
You've dabbled a little bit as well over in that area too.
Yeah. So I do love that, but I love the creating part even more. So, yeah.
Okay. As someone who is known for their enthusiastic story style and fascination with fairy tales, I need to know what your favorite fairy tale is, Jennifer.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's a hard question. So many. There's so many.
We can go top 3 if it's easier.
I always liked the Seven Swans, the Princess and the Swans.
Yeah.
I also read quite a few. I spent a while there reading a lot of Irish and Celtic folklore, myths and folklore as well. And some of the Irish ones are hilarious also. Tom Thumb is one that still kind of haunts me. I don't know that it's my favorite one, but it's one that has always stayed with me. I don't know why. And I think I had early childhood nightmares about, being this little tiny person and with the ogre coming in from the other room, which I think maybe that speaks to a lot of primal childhood angst.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I don't know, Puss in Boots for some reason was always a favorite of mine. Definitely, spent a lot of time pouring through fairy tales, and they certainly, they provide the foundation for a lot of what I do and a lot of what I read too, because I am a little bit of a fantasy buff for sure. So that fairy tale canon, definitely that thread runs through a lot of things.
And I love how fairy tales often reflect childhood and issues that you deal with in childhood too.
Oh, very, very much. And of course, the original versions were very, very bloodthirsty and
grim.
and grim. They definitely wouldn't get that PG or G rating on for the TV for Netflix now. But
for sure. So, who would you say are some of your influences and some of the writers that you look up to and maybe were inspired by in some of your works?
There's so many, so it kind of depends on my mood on any given time. I think growing up, I read very widely and a very eclectic range of books. So a lot of the classics I read. Obviously, I read a lot of Tolkien for a while. That was all I went through. I went through a very serious Tolkien phase for my entire childhood. Narnia, of course, was in there. Madeline L'Engle's Wrinkle in Time was one. That one actually was very significant because it was one of those books that it was an adventure. On the surface, it was a fantasy adventure, but it tied together threads, philosophy and science and fantasy and spirituality. And I'd never seen that. I had never encountered that in a book for young people before.
Wow.
All those thoughts and all those questions that were posed in that book, that was really sort of one of those mind-blowing books for me, was that Wrinkle in Time. A lot of, again, I did spend a lot of time with fairy tales and folklore, a lot of myths. My dad gave me the Odyssey to read when I was in grade 7, I think. So there was a lot of Greek myths back in there as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he also gave me Lord of the Flies when I was 9, which I have never really forgiven him for because I'm traumatized by it to this day.
Yeah, I don't think I read that till high school.
My father thought it was very funny that I would read anything that he gave me and that I would read it to the bitter end, because I didn't know that you could put a book down before reaching the end. That did not compute. So I still remember him coming up to me in the children's library, which was in the basement of the main library. And he found me in the horse and animals section, which is where I usually was. And he said, "You've read enough horse stories. Here, read this one." And I was like, "What's this one?" So it's a good story. You just read that.
It's about flies.
Flies. It's, kids on an island. It's an adventure story. No.
Yikes.
So there was lots of that. I loved a lot of outdoor adventure. So I read, my grandfather used to give me a lot of wilderness adventure and nature stories. So I read all kinds.
Nice.
There was a lot of Jack London. I read all of the Farley Mowat books. I wanted to be Jane Goodall. So, I read... I read a lot of natural history and that kind of thing as well.
Absolutely.
So if I wasn't going to be a university professor when I grew up, I wanted to be Jane Goodall, bouncing across the Serengeti in an open top Jeep or Range Rover kind of thing. But that hasn't happened yet, sadly. Maybe.
Fingers crossed. Still got time.
So I spent a lot of time reading. I read children's lit compulsively. So I buy myself picture books regularly, because you're never too old for picture books. And they're works of art. Picture books, they're works of art.
Absolutely.
Neil Gaiman is a big influence of mine, because he's just such a fabulous storyteller. There's all kinds. Holly Black, lots of Canadian ones. Sherry DeMoline, Eden Robinson, Thomas King. So many.
Absolutely.
It's like overload.
I don't want to work your brain too hard. Let's take a step back.
Breathe.
Time to meditate. No, but even just moving on a little bit, still in that realm, what would you say are some of the highlights of your career so far? Because as we've discussed, you've literally dabbled in many different areas, all within the same kind of spectrum. But what would you kind of highlight as some of the biggest highlights of your career so far, or some of the most memorable experiences?
The biggest highlights by far, the messages that I get from the kids. The messages I get from the kids and the messages I get from the teachers, who will tell me that, so-and-so in their class who never liked to read, who never read a book, is asking when they can read the next chapter and not wanting to put the book down. So those are the highlights. Getting messages from a mom who said their family isn't particularly, they're not really readers, but my books were the first ones that they read as a whole family, that they all read. And I guess the Forest of Reading awards in Canada are Reader's Choice Awards. So those ones are picked by the kids. Winning that one is like, those are the ones that really get you. So, yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. I remember I had one letter, because sometimes I get packages of letters from classes.
Oh, wow.
I have piles. And I remember there was one letter by one little girl, and she said, until in my book, Chocolate Rescue, there's a character of Petra, who's a girl, and she takes the initiative to decide that she's going to go try and save these boys who are stranded on an ice floe. So I got a letter from this one little girl, and she said, until I read your book, I didn't know a girl could drive a boat.
Oh,
And
wow.
so you were talking earlier about kids needing to see themselves in stories. It sounds like a small thing, but in this story, a girl took the initiative and she became the rescuer. A little girl who was a reader needed to see that. So those are the highlights.
That's amazing. You make me cry over here, Jennifer.
I know, that's what they do.
Aw, that's so sweet.
And that's why I write children's books.
Yeah.
Because, we get asked for hugs, not autographs.
That's amazing. Well, tell us a little bit about your upcoming projects, because I'm sure that the students, and including myself, are absolutely excited and ecstatic to know that you are continuing on the legacy.
Always. Yeah. Well, I think that's, both the curse and the bane of writers is we always have a bazillion different ideas in the hopper at any given time. And the trick is actually focusing and delving into one to finish it, to bring it to to fruition. But yes, I have another picture book that is coming out in 2022. It was supposed to be out in 2021, but circumstances being what they are, it got pushed a little bit, but that's okay. And I'm working on a sequel to the middle grade chapter books that I've written as well.
Oh, wow.
So
Congratulations.
And I have a list of, other things that I want to be writing as well. So then I have other projects that I cheat on my main projects with. So I think every writer is like that. I hope they're like that. Are they like that?
I think so personally, but
yeah, it's like, I'm just going to pretend this for a little bit because it's really fun. Yeah. So,
that's amazing.
Yeah. So there's always those projects.
So just moving on a little bit into success overall, because obviously being an award-winning children's author, everything else that you've done, you have definitely achieved a high level of success in your career. Just going back to your education a little bit, actually, talk to me about the level of focus and determination that it takes to complete that level of education.
That was my personality then as a student. And again, I was very academically focused then. Like I really thought that was my plan, was to be an academic long-term. I do have a competitive streak. So, if it's academics that I'm doing, then I want to go as far as I can and do as well as I can. I think it's odd to say, I think it's insecurity too. So it's wanting, there's a little bit of me still that wants to prove that I have a right to be in this arena, whether it's the academic one or whatever arena I am, whether it's my professional one or whether it's the publishing one. It's funny that you use the word success because it's not something I typically think of in terms of myself and that in that sense. So wow. I think I'm incredibly lucky.
It's actually very inspirational.
So after I finished my academic degrees, I kind of came back and I decided I wasn't going to go back to the final stage of doing my doctorate at that point because I just wanted to sort of regroup and I wanted to explore actually creating stories. So I knew I wanted to tell stories, and that evolved into telling stories in schools. So I would go in and give classroom presentations, and I would entertain kids with various nonsense poems and stories that I made up, unpublished ones, but just ones that I made up for whatever event I was doing.
Right.
That evolved into wanting to write something that my own kids would want to read. So that became the next project, was how can I write a chapter book that, my very busy, active oldest child would want to read all the way to the end, and that my younger one, who was just learning to read, could also manage to navigate the story. So that's where my first chapter book came from. And I really didn't think it would go anywhere beyond, I thought my family members might buy it. and it might have a little bit of local interest, but it's since kind of gone everywhere.
So you didn't know that would happen while you were writing it?
No, I had no idea.
Oh, wow.
I just was trying to write something that wouldn't completely embarrass me. Yeah, no, I really had no idea. I really thought it would be my family members would buy it and maybe a couple of people in town that I knew or that knew my mother.
Power of moms.
Yeah, never. Oh, yeah. this day.
That's amazing. What would you say is the best career decision that you've ever made?
Oh gosh, maybe I'm still waiting for it.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, we are. I don't know. I don't really think in terms of career decisions so much as I think of in terms of creative decisions, I think. So really that guided me a lot of the time. So whether it was having the opportunity to teach some of the local universities, to teach literature and to tell stories there, there's a lot of serendipity and happy accidents, really.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
So people, chance encounters and people asking me to do things. Oh, gee, would you mind? Could you come give a workshop or talk about this? Or would you mind coming to this event and telling stories? So there was really a lot of lucky happenstance, I think, right, as far as there's things that I really, really love to do. And I think I was fortunate that certain people noticed that I loved to do it and asked me to do it. And then that kind of grew into other opportunities. So part of it is following sort of those creative decisions, but then creating opportunities yourself. And I do find that the more you give, the more opportunities happen. Again, I think it does come about share what you love kind of thing. But no, there's something powerful about that too.
Absolutely. And would you say that kind of comes back to the power of networking as well and making those connections? And
100%. And that's actually something that I'm always working on, or that I have to work on more, because as much as when I get in front of a classroom of kids, I'm very outgoing and enthusiastic and animated. But on my personal side of things, I'm probably not as outgoing as I should be as far as networking goes. I probably haven't sort of pursued as many opportunities as I perhaps could have, which I think, as I mentioned to you earlier, I think is one of, if there's a silver lining to this new normal that we find ourselves in, it's that networking has become a little bit easier with that virtual element. So I am connecting more with my fellow authors and illustrators right across the country to a degree that I never have before. Being located in Atlantic Canada, well, it's an absolutely fantastic place to be. And there's, so many wonderfully talented creative people here. The reality is that a lot of events, a lot of networking opportunities take place in other parts of the country. And this is a pretty big country that we're in. So geographically speaking, it's sometimes physically hard for me to participate in some of these things. So now that everything's moved online, it is a little bit easier, I have to say. And it's very motivating as well. It's very inspiring as well to meet and talk to these other creators. I feel there's so much to learn from them. So I'm very much a learner at this stage of the game. I'm just kind of sitting back and listening to all these people and saying, wow, it's so cool that I get to be here.
And it's very funny that you mentioned that.
Having a seat at this table.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I find that too. And some people seem to be thriving more in this whole new online world and kind of just thrive behind the screen more so than kind of what the world was like before. And I find that as well, actually. What's your advice for getting more engaged and getting more involved in your own community?
I think, and this is the advice that I need to tell myself to take, is to stop waiting for an invitation. Stop waiting for an invitation to the table and just take a seat at the table. And again, it's something that I haven't done enough in the past, mostly because I think there's a little bit of that imposter syndrome. I think there was a lot of years where I just felt that I didn't deserve a seat at that particular table. Yeah. I just hadn't achieved the level of expertise and experience that I felt I ought to have to participate in these different conversations. My advice to my younger self would be, don't sit back, don't wait for an invitation, just join the conversation. Listen, but join.
That's deep. I like that.
Yeah.
I really like that. I'm going to remember that forever now, Jennifer. Just imprint it on my mind.
It's a two-way street. I mean, you always have to listen to the conversations that's happening around you, but it doesn't mean that you don't belong there. And it doesn't mean that you don't have valid things to contribute.
Absolutely. And if you could summarize success, if you could define what success means to you, what would you say?
I think for me, success is when I finish a story, whether it's published or not, and it gives me that giddy butterfly in the stomach feeling of, I look at it and I go, this is good. not good in a great, but I know this can make somebody else smile. I know that this can be something special for a reader. I know it has that spark. It doesn't always happen, but when it does, there's like a little bell that goes off or something. So it's partly that sense of when you've created something and you feel like it's real. And the other thing is when you put something out there and you realize that it means something special to someone else. So sort of like when I was saying those letters that I get, that's the definition of success for me.
Awesome. And I was so tuned in there, I lost my last question.
Happens to me all the time.
Oh yeah, writer's brain.
Yeah, squirrel.
It's like soup.
Oh yeah, a lot of soup brain.
So just before we let you go here, Jennifer, if you wanted to give some advice to anybody that wants to follow in your footsteps, that is any young child that's sitting at home listening to this podcast that wants to be like you, what would you say to them?
Read widely, explore widely, get out in the real world, do things that make you a bit uncomfortable, because the best stories happen when things don't go as you expected or planned. So, and listen to conversations and don't be afraid to make mistakes.
And I do have to do this to you just because of who you are. If we had a zombie apocalypse and you can only save one book, which book are you saving, Jennifer?
Oh, you're going to melt my brain with that.
You got to read it over and over and over again.
Oh gosh. Okay, which book has like the most stuff in it?
The zombies are coming. You don't have that much time to think about it.
Oh. Lord of the Rings. Full set.
Back to your childhood.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Including The Hobbit. Yeah.
What did you think of the movies? Justice was done, or?
The movies are their own beast, but well done in my mind.
Awesome.
They were true. I think they were true to the spirit of it.
Well, Jennifer McGrath, I think that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure's been all mine. Thanks for having me.
During COVID-19, during the pandemic, there was a lot of chaos going on. And we thought, what could we do throughout this period of time where instead of focusing on these problems, we could think of an opportunity.
My name is Matthew Evanson. I am co-founder and head coach at F.I.T Performance.
My name is Manana Bijue. I'm 21 years old, and I am the co-founder and head coach here at F.I.T Performance.
We initially met on our first day at fitness and health promotion at Durham College. Throughout that, we started to study together a little bit more. And we really noticed that we had a really good work connection. We could work well together.
So we started brainstorming. Matthew and myself would hop on calls every day, trying to think, create an idea. What can we do to really make an impact that can also change people's lives? And that's when we decided to come up with F.I.T Performance, which is now our company that we are very proud and very happy to bring to you guys. Our company offers personalized, tailored workout programs specific to your body that are safe, efficient, effective, and enjoyable.
We also have our training insights, which dive into the science behind some of our movements and what's happening exactly to your body when you're working out, when you're doing these types of things.
There you go, come on! Squeeze that back, come on, Matthew.
What sets us apart is our focus on lifestyle and mindset and training insights. We believe that focusing more on health as a holistic view and overall, physical and the mental aspect of things, focusing on overall wellness, we think not only provides you with more information and knowledge, but it helps with a better transformation and an overall healthy lifestyle. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. If you're interested on taking the first step to an everlasting journey of growth, physically, mentally, and emotionally,
feel free to reach out to us on our social media. We'll link our information at the end of the video, and we'd be more than happy to help you set and achieve your health and fitness goals by leveraging our functional improvement techniques. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your time, and we hope to connect with you soon. Take care.